In the bustling city of San Francisco, amid the tech giants and towering skyscrapers, there lived a man named John Miller. He wasn't always homeless, nor did he ever imagine he would end up that way. John had a life that many would envy: a stable job, a modest house in the suburbs, a loving wife, and dreams of climbing the corporate ladder in the tech world. However, life can be unpredictable, and what John experienced was a series of events so devastating that they left him with nothing. His story, though painful and heart-wrenching, is one of resilience, hope, and an extraordinary turnaround. The fall, losing everything. In 2017, John was working as a mid-level manager for a small but promising tech startup. The company had recently secured a new round of funding, and everything seemed to be heading in the right direction. John worked long hours, often missing family dinners, sacrificing weekends, and pouring his heart and soul into the company. He believed in the vision and trusted that all his efforts would pay off. He and his wife, Emily, had just celebrated their 5-year wedding anniversary and had started planning for the future, talks of children, upgrading their home, and possibly even investing in property. It all seemed so hopeful. But things were changing behind the scenes. The tech startup, like so many others, was burning through its funding at an alarming rate. The leadership team had made a series of poor financial decisions, investing in projects that never took off, and overhiring staff for roles that weren't necessary. Rumors of financial instability started circulating, but John, who had always been optimistic, dismissed them. He had faith in the company and believed they would turn things around. Then, one Friday afternoon, the unthinkable happened. John received an email calling all staff to a meeting, an urgent company-wide address. When John and his colleagues gathered in the conference room, the CEO entered with a grave expression. The company had run out of money. Effective immediately, they were filing for bankruptcy. Everyone in the room was to be let go. There would be no severance packages, no extensions of health benefits, nothing. They were simply handed their last paychecks and told to clear out their desks. John was in shock. This was the company he had given everything to. As he packed up his desk, a sick feeling of dread began to take over. The bills, how would he pay them? His mortgage? The loans? He had a few months' worth of savings, but with his wife working part-time as a freelance designer, they depended heavily on his salary. He drove home in silence, trying to make sense of everything. His head was spinning, but he kept telling himself, "I'll find another job soon." But the job market wasn't what he thought it would be. The economy had slowed and tech companies were tightening their belts. The competition was fierce. John sent out resume after resume, attended job fairs, networked with old colleagues. Nothing. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The savings they had quickly dried up, and with no job offers in sight, the situation became dire. Debt collectors started calling. Their mortgage went unpaid for months. The bills piled up, and soon, they were on the brink of losing everything. The breaking point. In the fall of 2018, John and Emily were evicted from their home. John had always been the provider, the strong one in the relationship, but now, for the first time in his life, he felt utterly helpless. His wife's freelance work wasn't enough to keep them afloat, and their relationship began to fracture under the strain. Emily, feeling abandoned and resentful, blamed John for the predicament they were in. She had begged him to take on any job he could find, even if it wasn't in tech. But John was stubborn. He didn't want to settle for less. He believed he could still find a position in his field, but as the months dragged on with no luck, that hope began to wane. One night after a particularly heated argument, Emily packed her bags and left. She didn't leave a note or say where she was going. She simply walked out the door. John was devastated. Losing his home was one thing, but losing his wife, that broke him. He felt like a failure, as a husband, as a professional, as a human being. With nowhere else to go, John took to the streets. He had no family nearby, no friends who could take him in. For the first time in his life, he was homeless. The first night he slept in his car, parked in a rundown neighborhood, he stared at the ceiling, wondering how things had gone so wrong. It all felt surreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He had once been a respected professional with a promising future, and now he was reduced to this, sleeping in his car, surviving on scraps. The days that followed were some of the darkest in John's life. He wandered the streets of San Francisco, searching for work, any work, but the reality of his situation hit him hard. He hadn't showered in days, his clothes were dirty, and he looked disheveled. No one would hire him. He tried to find shelter, but the waiting lists were long, and he often had to sleep on park benches or under bridges. Months passed, and John's situation remained bleak. He had lost weight, his hair had grown out, and he was almost unrecognizable to himself. He was ashamed of what he had become. He kept thinking about Emily, wondering where she was, and if she was doing better without him. Then, one cold winter evening as John sat outside a convenience store, something extraordinary happened. An older man, dressed in worn but clean clothes, approached him. The man's name was Carl. He wasn't like the others who would occasionally throw change at John or pass by without a second glance. Carl didn't offer John money. Instead, he sat down next to him and asked, "What's your story?" At first, John was hesitant. He had grown used to people looking at him with pity or disgust, but there was something different about Carl. He didn't look at John with judgment. Instead, his eyes were filled with understanding, as if he knew what John was going through. Slowly, John began to open up. He told Carl everything about his job loss, his wife leaving, and how he ended up on the streets. Carl listened without interrupting, nodding as John spoke. When John finished, Carl smiled and said, "I've been where you are. I know it seems hopeless now, but trust me, things can get better. You just need a little help." Carl then handed John a small business card. It wasn't a card for a job or a handout, but for a community center that helped homeless people get back on their feet. "Go there tomorrow," Carl said. "Tell them I sent you. They helped me when I had nothing, and they can help you too." John took the card, unsure of what to think. He had heard promises of help before, but most of them led nowhere. Still, there was something about Carl that gave him a glimmer of hope. Maybe this time would be different. The next day, John went to the community center. To his surprise, they welcomed him with open arms. He met with a counselor who listened to his story and immediately started connecting him with resources. The center provided John with a place to sleep, hot meals, and perhaps most importantly, access to a mentorship program that helped people like him rebuild their lives. For the first time in months, John felt like he had a chance. He enrolled in the center's job training program, where he learned new skills in tech development. The program wasn't easy, and John struggled at first. He was rusty and out of practice, but with the encouragement of his mentor, he persevered. Every day, he spent hours studying, practicing, and improving. Slowly but surely, John regained his confidence. Through the center's network, John found a part-time job as a junior developer for a small tech company. It wasn't the high-paying position he once had, but it was a start. The paycheck allowed him to rent a small room, and for the first time in a long time, he had a roof over his head. John poured himself into his work, determined not to let this opportunity slip away. Over the next 2 years, John's life began to transform. He worked his way up from junior developer to senior developer. His reputation as a hard worker and problem solver spread, and soon he was being offered positions at larger companies. But John had a different vision for his future. In 2022, John took a leap of faith and decided to start his own company. Using the skills he had developed and the connections he had made, he founded a tech startup focused on providing affordable online education to underserved communities. He knew firsthand how important it was to have access to education and opportunities, especially for people who were struggling to get back on their feet. His company, Rise Tech, grew rapidly. Within 3 years, it had become a multi-million-dollar business, offering online courses in coding, design, and business skills to thousands of people across the country. But John never forgot where he came from. He made it a point to hire people who had faced similar challenges: homelessness, addiction, or long-term unemployment. He wanted his company to be a place of second chances, just like the community center had been for him. John's story became an inspiration to many. He was invited to speak at conferences, featured in news articles, and even wrote a book about his journey. But despite all his success, he remained humble. He knew that he could have never done it alone, and he continued to give back to the community that had helped him. Every month, John donates a portion of his profits to homeless shelters and organizations that provide job training and resources to those in need. He also volunteers at the same community center that helped him, offering mentorship and guidance to people who are trying to rebuild their lives. Today, John Miller is a successful CEO, but his greatest achievement isn't the millions of dollars his company makes or the accolades he's received. It's the lives he's been able to touch, the people he's been able to help, and the hope he's been able to give to those who feel like there's no way out. John's journey from homelessness to CEO is a testament to the power of resilience, kindness, and the belief that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way forward. His story reminds us that sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you and one opportunity to change everything. And as John often says in his speeches, no matter how far you fall, it's never too late to rise again.